She chose to walk out. She's hated this family since she was 12, and now she shows up just to steal her grandmother's last dime. My mother screamed, spitting out her words, tearing through the silence of the most exclusive suburban Chicago restaurant. She was pointing a finger right in my face in front of 30 relatives playing the perfect victim, the virtuous mother betrayed by her greedy military daughter. I didn't blink. I slowly placed the manila folder down next to her champagne glass. At the far end of the table, my twin sister stared at her lap while my father's jaw clamped shut. I didn't open the file right away. What's inside these pages is the exact proof of why they threw me out on the street 22 years ago. But to understand why I was sitting in that room cold and merciless, you have to go back to the night they decided the budget isn't enough for both. So we're only investing in a single future. I'm Rose, 34, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. If you've ever been tossed aside by your own blood, I hope this story makes you feel a little less alone. Drop a comment below with your own story, and don't forget to like and subscribe. My mother's shriek hit the velvet-lined walls of the Hollowbrook private dining room and dropped dead. Dead silence. 30 faces, 30 people who shared my last name. 30 people who hadn't called me on my birthday in 2 decades turned and locked onto me. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. You could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. Aunt Pam cleared her throat. Tap, tap, tap. Her rhinestone-encrusted acrylic nails drummed a nervous rhythm against the thick glass tabletop. It sounded like cheap plastic hitting ice. Next to my mother, my father, Arthur, slowly pushed his champagne flute a few inches to the right. He didn't look up. He didn't dare meet my eyes. His gaze was glued to the plain manila folder resting squarely under my palms. I kept my hands perfectly flat on the cold marble table. Fingers together, back straight, shoulders squared, pressed hard against the oak chair, standard military posture. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say a damn word. I let the silence stretch heavy and thick. In the Army, silence isn't empty. It's a tactical weapon. Right now, it was turning this overpriced dining room into an interrogation cell. I watched a bead of sweat form at my father's hairline. They were starting to crack. Pam couldn't take the quiet anymore. She broke first, dropping her voice into that fake, sugary suburban drawl that made my skin crawl. Rose, sweetie. She started reaching up to adjust her real pearl necklace. You have your military pension, right? Letting Whitney have Eleanor's share. What's the harm? It's just property. We're all family here. Family. The magic word. The ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for toxic people. I shifted my eyes past Pam. I looked right at my twin sister, Whitney, the golden child. She sat shrink-wrapped in a custom silk dress that probably cost more than my first truck. On the surface, she was the picture of suburban perfection. But her hands told the real story. She kept them buried in her lap, fingers trembling against the expensive fabric. Her nails were bitten down to the quick. The cuticles were raw, picked over, and bleeding. Classic signs of a girl drowning in massive debt and chewing on Adderall just to keep her eyes open for the PTA meetings. They were closing ranks, surrounding me like a pack of well-dressed wolves. They wanted to use that word family like a pair of bolt cutters to snap the lock off the inheritance my grandmother rigged specifically for me. Pam smiled. A tight, bloodless smile. She thought she was being diplomatic. I thought she looked like a vulture circling a fresh carcass. My eyes drifted from Whitney back to my mother. She was gripping a glass of Cristal, $300 a bottle, bubbling right there in her manicured grip. She took a nervous sip, leaving a smudge of expensive red lipstick on the rim. I stared at those tiny gold bubbles and felt my jaw lock tight. $300. To make $300 in hazard pay, I once spent 4 hours packing combat gauze into a combat engineer's blown-out thigh. I did it kneeling in the dirt, in 104-degree heat in the middle of a forward operating base in Kandahar. My knees soaked in his blood, my ears ringing from mortar fire, praying the medevac chopper wouldn't get shot out of the sky. I earned my keep. Every single dollar in my bank account smelled like cordite, diesel fumes, and dried blood. And here sat the Hogan clan, treating money like chips in a country club poker game. They wanted to take my sweat, my deployments, my literal survival, and cash it out to keep up appearances. They felt entitled to decide who got to live comfortably and who was supposed to be the designated loser. The manila folder under my hands felt like it was radiating heat, burning against the thick calluses on my palms. I was 1 second away from flipping it open and blowing this entire sham to pieces. Then the heavy mahogany doors of the private room swung open. The waiters marched in, crisp white shirts, black vests pushing stainless steel carts holding our main courses. The clatter of wheels on the tile broke the tension. The head waiter stopped at the head of the table. He grabbed the brass handle of a massive silver cloche, lifted it in one smooth theatrical motion. Steam rolled off the platter. It hit my nose before I even saw the meat. Red wine, garlic, roasted onions, beef stew. My back teeth ground together so hard a sharp pain shot straight up into my temples. The muscles in my neck tightened like steel cables. It wasn't the smell of the alcohol. It was that specific heavy suffocating scent of the stew itself. It was a dead match. It smelled exactly like my mother's kitchen on a rainy evening 22 years ago. My chest tightened. The air in the velvet room vanished. The clinking of the silver forks went deafeningly quiet. All I could smell was the rich gravy. All I could see was a beaten-up canvas suitcase sitting on a scratched hardwood floor. The night they dragged me out the front door. The night my price tag was calculated and my future was liquidated. April. I was 12 years old. The smell hit me the second my worn sneakers scuffed across the threshold of the front door. Heavy beef broth, roasted onions, a sharp kick of red wine. It filled the hallway, making my stomach rumble, but the dining room table was completely bare. No ceramic plates, no silver forks, just the sterile chemical wipe down of lemon pledge on oak. Sitting right by the entryway was a canvas suitcase. Faded olive green, fraying hard at the seams. The rough fabric stiff with age, with a cheap brass padlock snapped shut through the zippers. It was my suitcase. Packed tight. In the living room, Arthur sat deep in his leather recliner. The only sound in the house was the sharp, dry crinkle of his Wall Street Journal. He didn't lower the paper when I walked in. He just turned the page. Snap! The paper acted as a perfect shield. My mother stepped out of the kitchen. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were freezing, digging into my skin. She had this smile plastered on her face, the kind of tight, industrial-grade smile she used for the neighborhood HOA board members. "Rose," she said, her voice dripping with fake sugary cheer. "You are going to stay at Uncle Raymond's farm for a little while." I looked at the bulging canvas bag. I looked at the financial newspaper hiding my father's face. I chewed on the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. "For how long?" I asked. "We will see how things go." Arthur's voice cut through the room. Flat, metallic. He never even dropped the paper. I didn't cry. I just stood there staring at the stock market index printed on the back page of his paper because I already knew the real answer. A week before that afternoon, I had been lying flat on my stomach in my bedroom upstairs. The hardwood floor was freezing against my ribs. I had my right ear pressed flush against the cold metal grating of the air vent. It fed directly into the kitchen below, carrying every word up to me like a radio broadcast. I could hear the clinking of wine glasses. Then my mother's voice hushed and slightly strained. "Are you sure about this, Arthur? Is it really fair to do this to her?" My father's reply didn't have an ounce of hesitation. It wasn't the voice of a father talking about his child. It was a CFO reviewing a quarterly loss on a Tuesday morning. "We do not have the budget, Linda." He stated, the ice in his tone freezing the air coming out of the vent. "You spread the resources too thin, you lose both of them. We have to cut our sunk costs. We are only investing in a single future." A single future. Those words nailed me to the floorboards. I was 12, but I knew exactly what a sunk cost was. I was the bad debt. The liability they needed to scrub off the family balance sheet so the numbers looked pretty. That single future they were talking about was sitting in the bedroom right next to mine. Whitney, the golden child. If you walked into our kitchen, you couldn't even see the stainless steel of the refrigerator door. It was completely buried under Whitney's ribbons. First place at the state science fair. Gold medals for math decathlons. She had private geometry tutors on Tuesdays. Masterclass violin lessons on Thursdays. Her future was fully funded. Me, I had a busted canvas suitcase and a closet full of Whitney's faded hand-me-downs. They didn't look at me like a daughter. They looked at me like a failed startup, a bad stock pick dragging down their portfolio. The rescue helicopter only had one seat left, and Arthur and Linda had done the math. Whitney yielded a higher return on investment. I was just overhead taking up space. By 7 o'clock that evening, the heavy crunch of gravel signaled Uncle Raymond's arrival. His rusted-out Ford F-15 sputtered and died in the driveway, leaking a fresh drop of dark oil onto Arthur's pristine concrete. My mother walked me out to the porch. The April air had a vicious bite to it. She placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, no weight to it. Just a cheap prop for the neighbors in case anyone was looking through their blinds. "Be good," she whispered. She kissed the top of my head. Her lips barely made contact with my hair. She turned around and walked back inside before my boots even reached the truck door. I grabbed the rusted handle of the Ford, hauled myself up onto the cracked vinyl passenger seat, and slammed the door shut. Bang! The metal rattled hard in its frame. I rolled down the window. The cold wind rushed in, but I couldn't look away from the house. Through the brightly lit kitchen window, I had a perfect view of my mother. She was standing by the stove. She picked up the massive Dutch oven holding the beef stew. The dinner that had been simmering all afternoon, filling the house with that rich smell. She didn't reach for a bowl. She walked straight over to the stainless steel trash can, stepped on the pedal, and dumped the entire pot of stew right into the garbage. Thick chunks of meat and gravy slid down the plastic liner. She threw out the dinner, just like she threw me out. The message was loud and clear. "We didn't even make this for you." Uncle Raymond ground the gears into drive. The transmission whined in protest. The old Ford lurched forward, the cab reeking of stale coffee and diesel fumes, leaving the perfect suburban lawn behind. If you are listening to this and you know exactly how it feels to be the scapegoat, to be treated like a burden by the people who were supposed to protect you, I need you to know you are not alone. Please take a second right now to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and just type, "I survived," if you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family. It helps me know who is fighting this battle with me. I rested my arm on the cold windowsill of the truck. I stared into the cracked side view mirror, watching my childhood home shrink into a dark, insignificant speck down the road. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. The engine roared, drowning out the silence in my chest. My parents had just liquidated me. They crossed my name out with a black marker. So if they were done with me, who the hell was going to stand up for Rose Hogan? Uncle Raymond's farm did not have geometry tutors. It did not have violin music playing softly in the background. It smelled of diesel fumes, wet dirt, and livestock. During that first week, I buried my face in a pillow that smelled faintly of mildew. I bit down on my bottom lip so hard I tasted blood just to keep the sobs from breaking out. I did not want anyone to hear. The second week, Raymond kicked my bedroom door open. It was 3 in the morning. "Up," he barked. "Grab a flashlight, or keep sleeping and pack your bag." I threw off the thin quilt. I shoved my feet into a pair of oversized insulated work boots and walked out into the freezing storm. It was 10 degrees below zero. The wind felt like razor blades slicing across my cheeks. I stood in the knee-deep snow, shining a heavy mag light under the chassis of a rusted John Deere tractor. Raymond was on his back in the slush, wrenching a frozen bolt. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. He did not look at me. He just kept working. Discipline does not need an audience, Rose. He grunted, spitting a mix of saliva and motor oil into the snow. You show up, you do the job. You do not care if it is cold. You do not care if you're sad, you finish it. That was the only lesson I needed. I never called Arthur or Linda for a dime. When I turned 18, I walked into an Army recruiting office. The United States Army did not care if I was a golden child. They did not ask for my state science ribbons. They only cared if I could pack a gunshot wound with gauze and load a rifle before the timer ran out. I crawled through freezing mud pits under barbed wire. I let the grit build a thick layer of steel over my skin. Years later, I stood on a polished wooden stage for my officer commissioning ceremony. I pinned on the rank of second lieutenant. I locked my knees and scanned the audience. Row 3. 5 empty metal folding chairs. My parents did not make the drive. Whitney did not show up. They had completely scrubbed me from their ledger. But two men were standing in the back row. Uncle Raymond wearing his only suit. Next to him was Sam, a heavy equipment welder with calluses so thick he could grab a hot pan off the stove. Sam did not say much, but he looked right at me and nodded. We got married 2 years later. They were my brick and mortar. I built my own fortress out of the scrap metal my family left behind. There was exactly one person from my bloodline who refused to let me fade out. Grandma Eleanor. She did not make phone calls. She did not send birthday presents, but 3 times a year, the mail clerk at the barracks would toss a cheap gray paper envelope onto my bunk. The paper was always thin and raspy. I would tear the edge open with my thumb. Inside, there was never a long letter, just a plain index card and a crumpled $10 bill. The ink was always black, written in her sharp, slanted cursive. 6 words. Thinking of you. Stand up straight. That was it. No apologies for what her son did to me. No false promises. It was a status report. A proof of life. That gray envelope was the single underground communication wire keeping my humanity from freezing over completely. I did not know it then, but that quiet woman was not just sending me pocket change. She was silently building an entire arsenal of financial intelligence. She was waiting for the exact right moment to hand me the detonator. February. The dead of winter at the military base. The cold seeped right through the concrete walls and settled deep into my joints. I was standing in the latrine, staring at my own exhausted reflection in the scuffed mirror. I cranked the stainless steel faucet all the way to the right. Freezing water blasted out. I shoved my hands under the stream. I grabbed a stiff bristle brush and started scrubbing. I had just come off a grueling medical shift. I was furiously scrubbing the harsh chemical smell of iodine and the sticky residue of dried blood out from under my fingernails. The water turned light pink before swirling down the drain. Then the phone on the metal bench vibrated, buzzing violently against the steel. The sound shattered the dead silence of the bathroom. I did not reach for it immediately. I watched the screen light up. The caller ID flashed an unknown number with my hometown area code. I twisted the faucet off. The sudden silence in the room felt heavy. I dried my hands on a rough paper towel and hit the accept button. It was a doctor at the local county hospital. His voice was clinical, stripped of all emotion. Grandma Eleanor had collapsed. A massive myocardial infarction. A widowmaker heart attack. It blocked the main artery completely. She was gone before she even hit the kitchen floor. I lowered the phone. The screen faded to black in my hand. Every internal defense system I'd built over the last 22 years started screaming. The red lights flashed in my head. My only ally was dead. The peace was over. The war was just starting. I pushed open the heavy fiberglass door to the intensive care unit. The smell hit me immediately. A sickening, sterile mix of industrial bleach and cheap lavender lotion. It coated the back of my throat, tasting like chemicals and decay. Grandma Eleanor lay in the center of the room. The steady mechanical hiss of the ventilator kept time, a ruthless metronome, counting down the seconds. Half of her face sagged, pulled down by the stroke that had ambushed her in her kitchen. Her eyes were clouded over, milky and unfocused, until they finally locked onto me. She did not look afraid. She looked pissed off. She reached out with a hand bruised dark purple from IV needles. Her knuckles were swollen, but her fingers clamped down on the thick fabric of my army uniform sleeve. Her grip was shaking violently, but it was tight. She dragged me down closer to her face. I locked my knees against the metal bed frame and leaned in. "The wooden box," she rasped. The words hissed through the gaps in her teeth, barely louder than the hum of the machines. "At the old house." I nodded once. I kept my face entirely neutral. I did not offer any soft, comforting lies about her getting better. That is not how we communicated. "Promise me." She forced the words out her chest, heaving painfully against the thin hospital gown. "You open it yourself. Do not let Arthur touch it." She let go of my sleeve and sank back into the pillow. One side of her mouth twitched up into a crooked, defiant smirk. "Now," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They cannot cut your rations anymore." 3 days later, the rhythmic hum of her heart monitor flatlined. The funeral was on a Thursday, February in the Midwest. The freezing rain came down in heavy sheets, turning the cemetery dirt into a thick, icy mud that sucked at our boots. I stood rigid under a massive black golf umbrella. Sam held it steady over my head, his heavy work boots sinking deep into the muck. Uncle Raymond stood on my other side, his bare calloused hands clasped tightly in front of him, freezing rain dripping off the brim of his faded ball cap. We looked at the casket. Then I turned my head and looked at the seating area under the green canvas canopy. The entire front row of metal folding chairs was completely empty. Arthur was not there. Linda was not there. Whitney was not there. They had claimed the roads were too slick. The weather was too dangerous for the drive. 22 years of total radio silence, and now they could not spare 3 hours of their day to bury the woman who gave birth to my father. They stayed home where the furnace worked, probably sitting on their leather couches, already running the numbers on what her empty property was worth on the current market. The gravediggers lowered the casket. The winch groaned in the cold air. The second the first shovel of wet earth hit the lid, I heard the sound. Click, clack, click. Stilettos on wet pavement. I turned around. Aunt Pam was picking her way through the puddles on the asphalt path. She wore a tailored black trench coat and shiny designer heels. She was holding a tissue to her dry eyes, carefully dabbing at expensive makeup that had not run at all. The burial was officially over, and the vulture had arrived to pick the bones. She made a beeline straight for me, pulling me slightly away from Sam and Raymond. "Rose, sweetie." Pam lowered her voice into that hushed conspiratorial tone that made my blood run cold. Her eyes darted around, scanning the desolate cemetery before locking onto my face. "You know your mother's health. She just could not make it out in this horrible storm." I kept my posture military straight. I did not give her an inch of warmth. Did Eleanor manage to get the house sorted out?" Pam asked, taking another step closer. The smell of her heavy floral perfume cut right through the freezing rain. "Your mother was just wondering who is going to have to clean out all that old stuff. It is a big job. We want to make sure it is handled properly." She was not here to mourn. She was a scout sent directly from Linda and Arthur to run reconnaissance on the real estate. I stepped back, establishing a hard physical perimeter. I looked her dead in the eyes. "The lawyer will handle it," I said. Pam froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She cleared her throat, gave a tight, awkward nod, and scurried back toward the paved road, her heels clicking rapidly away. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I sat in a heavy leather chair inside Marisol Vance's office in downtown Chicago. The room smelled like old paper, lemon oil, and expensive coffee. Floor-to-ceiling wood paneling covered the walls. No fake tears here, just ink paper and the cold reality of the law. Marisol was a shark in a tailored charcoal pantsuit. She slid a thick stapled document across the polished oak desk. "The entire estate," Marisol said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the front page. "The house, the assets. They belong to you." I stared at the paper. I did not reach for it yet. More importantly, Marisol continued, flipping to the third page. She pointed a heavy silver pen at a bolded paragraph. "Your grandmother was smart. She included a strict no contest clause." I looked up at her, waiting for the translation. "Anyone who sues over this will and loses absolutely everything." Marisol explained, her voice flat and absolute. "The probate period closes next Tuesday." At that exact moment, this document becomes permanent, unbreakable. A legal fortress, built quietly in the shadows by an old woman who knew exactly what kind of financial predators she had raised. Marisol reached down into her bottom desk drawer. I heard the scrape of heavy wood. She pulled something out and set it down heavily on the oak desk. It was a dark mahogany lockbox. The corners were reinforced with brass. A tarnished brass padlock secured the front latch. It looked heavy, solid, and completely out of place in a modern law office. "And this," Marisol said, pushing the box inches from my hand. "This is what she demanded I give directly to you." I looked at the brass lock. My reflection stared back at me in the dull metal. "She was very specific, Rose." Marisol warned, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. She said you are not to open this until you are entirely alone. I carried the heavy mahogany box into my house, the brass corners digging into my palms. I waited for Sam and the kids to fall asleep. Once the house settled into a dead heavy quiet, I carried the box into my home office. I set it down on the glass-top desk. I flipped on the desk lamp. A harsh yellow beam cut through the dark, illuminating the thick layer of dust coating the wood. The brass padlock was heavy industrial and locked tight. I did not bother looking for a key. I walked out to the garage, opened Sam's red metal toolbox, and grabbed a heavy steel wrench and a flathead screwdriver. I walked back, wedged the steel tip of the screwdriver under the brass loop, and brought the wrench down hard. Crack. The metal lock snapped. The sound echoed off the drywall like a gunshot. I threw the broken padlock in the trash and pushed the heavy wooden lid open. The smell of dry, rot-stale air and old paper wafted up. There were no sentimental keepsakes inside, no faded family Polaroids, no locks of baby hair. It was a massive stack of financial documents strangled by thick, brittle rubber bands. On top of the stack lay a single sheet of unlined paper. The black ink was applied heavily, pressing deep into the page. Grandma Eleanor's jagged, slanted cursive. Rose, I was too much of a coward to stop them, so I kept this. You carved out your own place with blood. Do not ever sit at their table and beg for a seat. Look inside. I set the note aside. I hooked my finger under the thick rubber bands. They snapped instantly, crumbling into dry flakes across the glass desk. I peeled back the first page. It was a bank statement. The edges were yellowed stiff with age. The date stamped at the top was 20 years old. The header read Hogan Children Educational Trust. Account holders Rose and Whitney. I dragged my index finger down the transaction column. The ink was faded, but the black numbers were sharp. The dates started in May. The exact month after I turned 12, the month they shipped me off in a rusted Ford. Withdrawal, $2,000. Memo, Midwest, private academy tuition. Withdrawal, $800. Memo, state math camp. Withdrawal, $1,500. Memo, master class violin. I flipped page after page, line by line, month by month. I tracked the bleeding. Every single dollar from that joint trust fund was routed directly into Whitney's personal checking accounts. They were systematically draining my half, funding the golden child with the scapegoat's money. I flipped to the very last page of the thick stack. The final statement, ending balance. $0. My throat felt like it was packed with crushed glass. I swallowed hard, but there was no moisture left in my mouth. I stared at that zero. The black ink seemed to burn a hole straight through the paper. When I was 20 years old, I signed a government contract extending my combat deployment in the Middle East for another 6 months. I did not do it out of raw patriotism. I did it because I was drowning in predatory student loan debt. I spent that entire winter living in a sandbagged bunker. Every single morning, I strapped 35 pounds of Kevlar and ceramic trauma plates to my chest. I rode in armored convoys over dirt roads littered with improvised explosives. I exposed myself to sniper fire on a daily basis, breathing in diesel fumes and cordite. I did all of that to collect a combat hazard pay bonus just to keep the bank from defaulting on my loans. While I was eating sandpacking bullet wounds with gauze and gambling my life to pay for a basic college education, Arthur and Linda were quietly draining my legal trust fund. They stole my money down to the last red cent. They did not just abandon me, they robbed me. They used my financial blood to water their perfect suburban greenhouse flower. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark office watching the streetlights fade as the sun started bleeding through the plastic blinds. At 6 a.m, I fired up the scanner. I fed the entire stack of yellowed bank statements through the machine and sent the encrypted file straight to Marisol's office email. I called her right after. She picked up on the second ring. I heard the rapid clicking of her computer mouse as she opened the file and reviewed the scans. For a long minute, there was nothing but silence on the line. When Marisol finally spoke, her voice was razor sharp. The polite professional distance of a probate lawyer was gone. "Rose!" Marisol said, her tone dead serious. Liquidating a minor's trust fund for undisclosed unilateral purposes is severe financial abuse. Your parents committed fraud. They broke the law. Marisol paused. I could hear her taking a slow, calculated breath through the receiver. You thought your grandmother's will was a shield to protect you from them, Marisol said quietly. It is not a shield, Rose. She just handed you an executioner's sword. Draft the paperwork, I said. I ended the call. I sat perfectly still in the quiet house, staring at the scattered yellowed papers covering my desk. The cold, hard evidence of a 22-year heist. The anger in my chest was not hot or explosive. It was absolute freezing zero. Cold fury. Then the silence broke. My cell phone began to vibrate aggressively against the glass tabletop. A harsh, grinding noise. The screen lit up in the dim room, glowing bright white. I looked at the caller ID. It was a contact name I had not seen on a screen in 22 years. Mom. The phone vibrated violently against the glass desktop, rattling the loose metal staples nearby. The name, Mom, glowed bright white in the dark room. I watched it ring twice. I swiped the glass and hit the speaker icon. Rose, sweetheart. The voice poured out of the tiny speaker. It was thick, sugary. It sounded exactly like cheap artificial syrup poured over a rotting tooth. Life is just too short. Linda sighed. The theatrical sadness was sickeningly perfect. What happened with your grandmother? Well, it made your father and me realize we need a fresh start. We want to host a family dinner at the Hollow Brook restaurant this Saturday. You will come, right? People do not just wake up and decide to love you on a random Thursday. They do not suddenly discover the meaning of family. They only call you when a massive legal deadline is breathing down their necks. Tuesday was coming. The probate lock was closing fast. I stared at the broken brass padlock sitting in the plastic trash can. I will be there, I said. I tapped the red button. The line went dead. It was an ambush, a coordinated strike. I knew the terrain and I knew exactly who I was dealing with. For the next 48 hours, Aunt Pam ran point on the carpet bombing. She activated the family gossip network, acting as Linda's primary attack dog. Her manicured fingers worked the phone lines around the clock, spinning a massive, aggressive smear campaign. Word leaked back to me through Sam's cousin who worked at the local hardware store. Pam was telling the entire bloodline that I was a greedy, ungrateful stray. She claimed I manipulated a dying woman in her final hours just to steal the real estate out from under the real family. Relatives I had not seen in 2 decades were suddenly loading their magazines. They were preparing a united front building a wall of hostility for the Saturday dinner. I did not post online. I did not make angry phone calls to defend my name. I maintained absolute unbreakable radio silence. In the military, you learn a hard truth. You let the enemy think they hold the high ground. You let them talk. The louder they get, the sloppier they get. Arrogance is a massive tactical vulnerability. I just sat in the dark, watching them dig their own graves. Saturday morning, Whitney demanded a meeting. I picked a greasy run-down spoon off the interstate. The air inside was thick, smelling heavily of burnt filter coffee, old frying oil, and stale cigarette smoke from the parking lot. The vinyl booth was cracked, the yellow foam spilling out from under strips of gray duct tape. Whitney sat across from me. The former golden child looked like a hollowed-out shell. Deep, bruised bags hung under her bloodshot eyes. She wore an expensive cashmere sweater, but the cuffs were frayed. She hugged her knees to her chest, pushing a chipped ceramic mug around the sticky table. She stared down at the black coffee. She dropped the bomb without even looking up. When we were little, I asked Mom why you never came back, Whitney muttered. Her voice was trembling, cracking at the edges. She said you hated us. She told me you chose to stay at Uncle Raymond's farm because you could not stand the sight of me anymore. She said you wanted to punish us. I picked up my heavy glass of ice water. The condensation dripped off the glass and ran down my knuckles. I set it down hard. The ice clattered loudly against the glass. I locked my eyes onto her pale, drawn face. Listen to me, I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any sympathy. I was 12 years old, Whitney. No 12-year-old kid in the world gets to choose to walk out the front door. Whitney froze. Her hands stopped moving the mug. The remaining color drained completely from her face. Her eyes blew wide open, staring at me in absolute suffocating horror. 22 years of Linda's calculated gaslighting shattered right there on the sticky diner table. Whitney realized she was not the winner. She was just another casualty. A pawn they fed with my stolen money, kept blind and stupid so they could play the perfect suburban family. I slid out of the booth. I did not offer her a hug. I did not hold her hand. I threw a $5 bill on the table and walked out into the cold air. 12 o'clock noon. I was sitting in the cab of my truck parked in the lot. My phone chimed. A loud, sharp ping. An iMessage notification popped up on the lock screen. It was the massive 30-person family group chat. A chat I had been silently sitting in for years, entirely forgotten. Linda sent a text. 5 seconds later, the text vanished. She deleted it. But combat training drills reaction time deep into your muscle memory. Before she even hit the delete button, my thumb had already clamped down on the side buttons. Click. Screenshot saved. I opened my photo gallery. I zoomed in on the glowing screen. The text was crystal clear. The second she signs the house over to Whitney tonight, we are done. Do not let her leave if she is not signed. Just play nice, but you have to be firm with her. I stared at the words, the sheer naked stupidity of it. They handed me their entire battle plan. They loaded the gun, cocked the hammer, and handed the weapon straight to me. I pressed the power button. The screen went black, reflecting my calm, steady eyes. I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket, stepped out of the truck, and walked straight toward the heavy mahogany doors of the Hollowbrook restaurant. I sat perfectly still at the long marble table inside the Hollowbrook private dining room, watching my mother put on the performance of a lifetime. The heavy scent of the red wine beef stew hung in the air, thick and suffocating, mixing with the smell of expensive perfumes and nervous sweat. My pulse was dead calm. I was a soldier sitting in a room full of civilians who thought they knew how to fight. Linda was standing up, her face flushed and angry, blotchy red. She was a masterclass in playing the wounded victim. Her diamond tennis bracelet rattled violently against her wrist as she pointed a shaking finger right across the table, aiming directly at my face. This family deserves to know the truth. She shrieked, her voice cracking with perfectly calculated fake emotion. They need to see what you really are. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands in defense. I just gave her a slow mechanical nod. You are right, I said. My voice was completely flat, cutting through the heated, chaotic air of the dining room like a straight razor. Everyone here deserves the truth, so let's start with mine. I placed my calloused hand on the manila folder resting in front of me. I flipped the heavy cardboard cover open. I pulled out the top sheet of paper, pressed my fingertips against the sharp edge, and pushed it. The document slid across the polished marble with a sharp hissing sound. It coasted smoothly past the silver butter dishes and the crystal water glasses, coming to a dead stop exactly 3 inches from my father's nose. Arthur stared at it. He did not move his hands. He did not breathe. Voluntary transfer of guardianship. I announced, projecting my voice from my chest so it bounced off the dark velvet walls. Signed and dated on May 14th, the exact year I was 12 years old. The clinking of silverware stopped completely. 30 relatives sat frozen in their mahogany chairs, holding their breath. You could hear the low hum of the HVAC unit in the ceiling. Some of the older cousins shifted uncomfortably, the leather seats squeaking under the sudden tension. It is fully notarized. I continued, locking my eyes on my father. Arthur, do you want to read your listed reason out loud for the rest of the table? Or should I do it? Arthur's face drained. The color bled out of his skin until he looked like wet cement. His jaw worked, grinding his back teeth, but no sound came out. He looked exactly like a cornered rat caught in the headlights. I didn't give him a single second to recover. I raised my chin and read the exact words that had been burned into my memory. You wrote, and I quote, "insufficient budget to allocate for both. Must cut costs." The room erupted in a collective stifled gasp. A heavy, stunned shockwave rolled through the bloodline. Aunt Pam's jaw literally dropped open, her perfectly painted lips parting in absolute horror. The smug, judgmental look she'd worn like a badge of honor all evening melted right off her face, leaving behind nothing but raw shock. I shoved my chair back. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the tile floor. I stood up, planted both of my hands flat on the table, and leaned hard toward my mother, invading her space. I did not go AWOL from this house, I said, my voice dropping an octave, vibrating with 22 years of cold fury. I was 12 years old. You packed a cheap canvas bag and shoved me in the passenger seat of a rusted truck because you ran the numbers and decided I was not a profitable investment. Linda looked like she had been physically struck with a baseball bat. I turned my head, breaking eye contact with her, and looked down the long table at Whitney. The golden child was falling apart at the seams. She was gripping the white linen tablecloth so hard her knuckles were bone white. She was shaking uncontrollably, vibrating in her expensive silk dress. "Mom brainwashed you," I said to her, keeping my tone steady, forcing her to finally hear reality. "She told you I ran away, didn't she? She told you I hated you and abandoned this family." Whitney looked up at me. Her face was paper white, completely stripped of its arrogant suburban polish. Hot tears spilled over her lower eyelids, ruining her expensive mascara, leaving dark tracks down her cheeks. She gave a slow, pathetic, desperate nod. The entire foundation of the Hogan family was cracking wide open. The perfect PR image was burning to the ground right in front of them. Linda desperately tried to patch the leak. She opened her mouth, her eyes darting wildly around the room, sucking in a harsh breath to launch another desperate lie. I cut her off completely. I reached back into the manila folder and grabbed the thick stack of yellowed bank statements. Smack! I slammed the heavy stack down in the dead center of the table. The loud thud made the water glasses vibrate and spill ice onto the marble. "That paper was you throwing me in the garbage," I said, my voice turning to gravel. "Now, let's talk about you stealing my money." Arthur jolted violently in his chair. The sheer panic finally overrode his paralysis. He lunged forward, knocking his champagne flute over. His heavy arms reached frantically across the table, desperately trying to snatch the stack of statements before anyone else could read the faded, black numbers. My reflexes were a hell of a lot faster than a retired finance manager. I slammed my left hand down on top of the papers, pinning them flat against the marble. My arm locked rigid. He yanked at the corner of the pages, but the stack did not move an inch. If you are listening to this right now and you have ever had your reality twisted by a toxic parent, you know exactly how vindicating this moment feels. The truth always leaves a paper trail. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Drop a comment below and type, "The truth wins," so I know you are standing with me in this room. I leaned forward, putting my entire body weight onto my left arm, trapping the documents under my palm. I looked up, scanning the 30 shocked faces staring at the absolute wreckage of our family. The Hogan Educational Trust. I announced loudly, my voice dominating every single sound in the room. From the year I turned 13, this account was bled completely dry. I said, my voice carrying over the dead silence of the dining room. I kept my left hand pinned flat over the thick stack of yellowed bank statements. I locked my eyes onto my father. I watched a thick blue vein bulge against the thin skin of his temple. Tens of thousands of dollars, my legal half, transferred directly into Whitney's personal accounts. I stated, delivering the facts like a forensic auditor. To pay off my student loans, I had to fly into a combat zone. I strapped 35 pounds of Kevlar and ceramic trauma plates to my chest. I dragged my boots through the dirt in 104-degree heat. No one at the long marble table dared to breathe. The 30 relatives were frozen solid, trapped in their heavy mahogany chairs. I put my head in the crosshairs of sniper fire just to collect a hazard pay bonus. I continued, my voice dropping an octave. While I was dodging shrapnel to pay for a basic college degree, you two took my legal money to pay for private masterclass violin lessons for the kid you actually wanted to keep. I leaned forward, closing the distance across the table. "You did not just throw me away," I said. "You sold me." That was it. The absolute breaking limit of Arthur Hogan's massive, fragile ego. A normal man would deny it. A normal man with an ounce of shame would look at the floor. But Arthur was a tyrant. He spent his entire life bullying people in corporate boardrooms, relying on spreadsheets to justify his cruelty. Being exposed by the daughter he discarded was a fatal blow to his pride. his dictator complex completely short-circuited. He slammed his heavy fist down onto the marble table. Crash! His crystal champagne flute tipped over. It rolled off the edge and shattered into a dozen jagged pieces on the tile floor. The expensive pale liquid splashed across the cuffs of his tailored wool suit. "We did what we had to do," Arthur roared. Thick drops of spit flew from the corners of his mouth. His face was a violent, mottled purple. "No one wastes resources we could only afford to invest in a single future." Boom! He stepped right on his own landmine. The echo of his shouting bounced off the dark velvet walls and faded into a heavy, suffocating silence. 30 people stared at him in absolute shock. He had just screamed a full, unedited confession to the exact crowd of people he spent 22 years trying to impress. The mask was gone. The ugly, calculating monster underneath was standing right there in the open. Suddenly, a heavy wooden chair scraped violently backward and crashed to the floor. Whitney stood up. She lunged across the table and snatched the yellowed bank statements right out from under my hand. Her manicured fingers were shaking so violently, the dry paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. She stared down at the black numbers. The math camp tuition, the private tutors, all of her achievements paid for with my blood. She slowly turned her head to look at our mother. "Mom," Whitney choked out. Her voice was thin, hollow. "Mom, you told me she chose to leave us." Linda's face was completely bloodless. The heavy layer of foundation on her skin looked like a wax mask melting under heat. She reached a trembling hand out across the table. "Sweetheart, please, you have to understand the pressure we were under." "You stole my sister!" Whitney screamed. It was not a word. It was the guttural, agonizing shriek of a wounded animal. The perfect golden child facade was gone, replaced by a broken woman, realizing her entire life was a manufactured lie. "You took her money to dress me up." Whitney sobbed, her voice tearing at her throat. She threw the bank statements across the table. They hit Linda in the chest and scattered across the plates. "And then you brainwashed me. You poisoned my head so I would hate her." Linda's mask of suburban virtue shattered into a million pieces. She lunged forward, desperately trying to grab Whitney's wrists to silence her. "Whitney, stop it!" Linda begged, her eyes darting around the room in sheer panic. Whitney violently shoved her mother's hands away. She backed up against the wall, hyperventilating, staring at our parents like they were strangers, like they were monsters. The table descended into total chaos. Cousins were whispering furiously to each other. Uncles were staring at Arthur in pure, unadulterated disgust. I remained perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not move. I just sat in my chair and watched the empire burn. Then Aunt Pam made her move. She saw the family PR sinking to the bottom of the ocean, and she threw out a desperate, flailing lifeline. She leaned across the table and pointed her long acrylic nail directly at my face. "Do not listen to her manipulation." "Whitney!" Pam screeched. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the noise like a rusty saw. "Look at her. Look at what she's doing. She only dragged herself in here to steal your grandmother's house right out from under us. You really think she has good intentions?" Pam smiled, a vicious cornered smile. She thought she had found a weak spot. She thought she could turn the narrative back around on me by questioning my motive. I did not argue. I did not defend my intentions or raise my voice to shout her down. Military discipline teaches you one fundamental rule about a firefight. You let the enemy empty their magazine first, and you always keep one armor-piercing round chambered for the final target. I reached into the front pocket of my jacket. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal edge of my cell phone. I pulled it out and set it face up on the marble table. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up in the dim dining room. "Let me show everyone who actually has a motive," I said. I slid my cell phone to the dead center of the marble table. The glass back scraped harshly against the stone. The screen was glowing bright white, cutting through the dim yellow chandelier light. It was the screenshot of the 30-person family group chat. I did not wait for anyone to lean in or pull out their reading glasses. I projected my voice from the bottom of my chest, reading the text out loud, word for exact word. Quote, "The second she signs the house over to Whitney tonight, we are done. Do not let her leave if she is not signed. Just play nice, but you have to be firm." Unquote. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. It sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Down at the far end of the table, Uncle David, a retired pipe fitter who had not spoken a single word all night, dropped his heavy silver fork onto his ceramic plate. The sharp clatter made Pam flinch. He turned his thick neck and glared directly at her. "Pam!" David growled, his voice thick with raw disgust. "You spent the last 2 days calling my house telling me Rose was pulling a scam. But this text makes it pretty damn clear you people were setting a trap." Pam choked on her own spit. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on hot concrete. The smug arrogance she wore all night evaporated. She dropped her head, burying her face in her hands, her fake rhinestones glittering uselessly under the lights. That was the breaking point. Linda completely lost her mind. The polished suburban housewife routine shattered into jagged pieces. She started screaming, ugly guttural screaming that scraped the back of her throat. She cursed at Whitney. She cursed at me. She called us ungrateful, selfish brats who ruined her life. The true tyrannical nature of the woman who threw her 12-year-old daughter in the trash was finally on full display for every cousin, aunt, and uncle to witness. I did not flinch. I did not yell back. I did not give her a single ounce of my energy. I reached across the table and gathered the yellowed bank statements. I stacked them neatly, one crisp tap against the marble to align the edges perfectly. I slid the papers back into my leather briefcase. Click, click. I snapped the brass lock shut. The sharp mechanical sound cut right through Linda's hysterical shrieking. "I am not signing anything," I stated. My voice was not loud, but it possessed the absolute cutting authority of a commanding officer. Linda's mouth snapped shut, choking on her next insult. "Eleanor's will has a strict no contest clause. This coming Tuesday, that house belongs to me," I said, locking my eyes straight onto Arthur. "As for the educational trust fund you stole, my lawyer has already prepped the complete file. Fraud, grand larceny, financial abuse of a minor. You better find yourselves a hell of a defense attorney." Arthur's face was the color of dirty snow. He was a numbers guy. He knew the math. He knew a bluff when he saw one, and he knew I was holding a royal flush. He was looking down the barrel of a federal indictment, and he knew it. I picked up my briefcase by the heavy leather handle. I walked around the shattered glass and the spilled champagne soaking into the rug. I stopped right behind Whitney's chair. She was hunched over, sobbing so hard her shoulders were shaking convulsively. Her expensive silk dress was wrinkled, her hands clutching her face. She was completely broken. I reached into the breast pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a thick, cream-colored business card. I reached down and shoved it firmly into Whitney's trembling hand. "This is Marisol Vance. She's a probate and financial lawyer." I said, my voice low, meant only for her ears. "She can help you untangle the massive debt they forced you to carry." Whitney looked up at me. Her mascara was completely washed away, leaving dark streaks down her pale cheeks. Her eyes were begging for a savior, begging for me to step in, pay off her debts, and fix the mess. I shook my head. "Listen to me closely, Whitney. I am not a supply station for anyone anymore." I said, my tone absolute iron. "I am not bailing you out. You have to do this yourself. When you can stand on your own 2 feet, you call me as a sister." I turned my back. I did not look at Arthur's pale, sweaty face. I did not look at Linda, who was now weeping into a cloth napkin, playing a victim to a crowd that was no longer buying the act. I ignored the desperate, chaotic noise echoing behind me. I walked straight to the heavy oak doors of the Hollowbrook dining room. I pushed the brass handles. The doors swung open heavily. The main lobby of the restaurant was dead quiet. The waitstaff stood off to the side by the host stand, their eyes wide, staying completely out of my way. Nobody moved to stop me. Nobody blocked my path. The 22-year psychological war was officially over. Their empire had just burned to ashes, completely incinerated by a fire they lit with their own hands. I pushed through the front glass doors and stepped out into the parking lot. The freezing, sharp night air of Chicago hit my face. It filled my lungs, cold, clean, and absolutely pure. Exactly 1 week after the Hollowbrook dinner, a thick, heavy manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address printed in the corner belonged to a high-rise corporate law firm in downtown Chicago. I stood on the front porch. The freezing night wind cut right through my thin cotton shirt. It filled my lungs sharp and clean. I tore the thick paper open with my bare hands. 2 documents inside. The first was a formal legal withdrawal. Arthur and Linda dropped all claims to Eleanor's estate. The financial threat of Marisol's fraud case had backed them entirely into a corner. They surrendered the property. The second document was personal. A formal typed letter. It stated in cold, sterile legal terms that they were officially severing all ties. They were disowning me. They wanted it in writing, needing a physical piece of paper to protect their own fragile egos. They needed to feel like they were the ones throwing me out, not the other way around. I stared at the black ink. I did not cry. My chest did not tighten. I walked back into the kitchen. Sam was standing by the sink washing a grease-stained coffee mug. He wiped his rough hands on a rag and pulled a heavy metal pen from his work shirt pocket. He handed it to me. He did not ask a single question. I laid the paper flat on the kitchen island. I pressed the tip of the pen into the blank signature line. Scratch, scratch. I signed my name. I slid the paper into a return envelope and dropped it straight back into the outgoing mail pile. To them, it was a letter of disownment. To me, it was a totally different document. It was my discharge papers from a 22-year prison sentence. The winter finally broke. The heavy Chicago snow melted into a wet, muddy spring. On a Tuesday afternoon in early May, an old rattling sedan pulled into my driveway. It was not a luxury suburban SUV. The brakes squealed loudly. The driver's side door popped open with a metallic groan. Whitney stepped out. She had moved out of our parents' basement 3 months prior. She filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidating every single asset tied to her name to wipe the massive debts clean. The golden child was dead. The woman standing in my driveway was wearing faded blue jeans and a plain gray sweater. She smelled faintly of yeast and powdered sugar. She had taken a full-time job working the counter at a local bakery downtown. It was our 35th birthday. We did not run toward each other. We did not hug. We did not cry or exchange hollow apologies. The damage was too deep and too ugly for a movie ending. Instead, we sat side by side on the cold concrete steps of my back patio. Sam brought out 2 tall cans of cheap domestic beer. He set them down on the concrete and walked away, giving us a wide perimeter. I cracked my can open. The aluminum snapped loudly. Whitney opened hers. We stared out at the overgrown grass. We talked about the weather. We talked about the busted transmission in her car. We talked about the grueling hours at the bakery. It was a slow, awkward conversation. We were 2 veterans walking through a minefield, constantly scanning the ground, heavily guarded. But it was real. For the first time in our entire lives, there was no red ribbon. There was no financial spreadsheet calculating our worth. Just 2 women sitting on a concrete slab drinking cheap beer. The next morning, I stood by the kitchen window. The sun was burning off the morning dew. I held a thick ceramic mug of black coffee. The bitter, dark liquid burned the back of my throat. I looked out at the yard. Mia was sprinting across the wet grass, laughing hysterically while chasing our heavy golden retriever. Sam was walking behind them, carrying little Eli on his broad shoulders. Over by the property line, Uncle Raymond was kneeling in the dirt. He was wearing his faded canvas work jacket, holding a heavy steel hammer. He was fixing a wooden gate that had sagged off its hinges during the winter freeze. Bang! 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 The sound of the hammer hitting the wood echoed across the yard. Solid. Permanent. I watched them. This was my base. This was my chosen perimeter. Raymond, Sam, the kids. They never once asked me to prove my value. They never ran a cost-benefit analysis on my existence. They took me in when I was a useless, broken 12-year-old kid dragging a torn canvas duffel bag. They loved me when I had absolutely zero capital to offer. Family is not the people who have enough room in their budget to keep you around. Family is the people who completely refuse to calculate the cost of standing by your side. If you are listening to this right now, and you are currently trapped inside someone else's twisted spreadsheet, if you are breaking your own back trying to prove you are a profitable investment to people who share your blood, listen to me very carefully. You do not have to wait for them to let you go. You have the absolute right to sign your own discharge papers. I am Rose Hogan, and this is the end of my report. Thank you for standing with me on this battlefield. If you saw your own reflection in this story, if you have ever had to cut ties to save your own life, I need you to hit the like button right now. Leave a comment down below and type, "Discharge papers signed," so I know you are taking your life back. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more. The dawn out there belongs to you. Go take it yourself.